Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of my video for module 1. Last time we talked about the definitions in literature and we also tackled the two categories in literature and also the two divisions in literature. Now I actually skipped a topic on your module if you can notice that, and that is the importance of literature and history. Yes, well, when we talk about the importance of literature, that's actually the answer for why do we need to study the Philippine literature. Well, the reason why I didn't tackle this last time because I'm assuming that everyone already knows the importance of literature in human society. Well, as all of you know, that almost all our knowledge is we actually owe it to literature. Well, thanks to literature, we know what kind of people are there in the past, and through recordings and history books, and also through the use of our textbooks and modules, examples of literature, we learned a lot of things today, and almost everything that we know today, let's say for an example, in making an alcohol, using our phones, etc. Well, without proper recordings and the proper use of literature, we do not know these things today. In today's video, we're going to have a deeper understanding regarding the divisions in literature, well, namely prose and poetry. When we talk about prose, it says here, prose consists of those written with the common flow of conversation in the sentence and paragraphs. Meaning to say, common flow of conversation, parang nag-uusap lang, nagkukwento lang. Well, kapag nakita ka ng written or literary work written in a common flow of conversation, well, definitely that is a prose. Good examples of this are the newspapers, no? Wherein parang may sinasabi lang siya sa'yo. The other division is the poetry, which refers to those expression in verse with measures, rhyme, line, and stanzas, and has more melodious tone. Well, to compare it from prose, it is written more in melodious tone. Well, you can easily identify the difference between a prose and a poetry in terms of how they were written, no? Melodious tone, kumbaga poetic ang pagkakasulat sa kanya. Unlike sa prose na parang nag-uusap lang o nagkukwento lang ang pagkakasulat sa kanya, no? Later on, we're going to talk about poetry, more on its measures, rhymes, etc. for your better understanding the difference between prose and of course poetry. Pag-usapan natin ng prose, no? Well, prose consists of those written within the common flow of conversation in a sentence and paragraph. So, katulad nga na sinabi natin kanina, parang nagkukwento lang o parang may sinasabi lang sa'yo. Examples of prose are novels, short stories, plays, legends, fables, anecdotes, essays, biographies, no, news, and of course, oration. Kapag sinabi natin kasing prose, kung mapapansin nyo, halos lahat ng examples niyan ay nagsasabi ng istorya o may sinasabing istorya, no? May sinasabing story. Unlike, well, maliban doon sa oration, wherein hindi naman talaga siya nagsasabi ng istorya. Well, a good example of this is the legends. Well, legends are stories, fables, of course, and anecdotes, as well as the news, story of a particular event, and the same goes with essay. However, although it is a story of a particular event, nagbibigay naman yung writer sa essay ng opinion, no? Kung naguguluhan kayo, let's talk about novels first. Kapag pinag-usapan natin novel, hindi natin pwedeng iwalay yung short story. Kasi doon natin makikita kung anong pinagkaiba ng short story na pinagawa ko sa inyo at doon sa novels na nakikita natin, no? At nababasa natin. Well, that's easy. When we compare novel to a short story, a novel is long and a short story is, well, technically short, no? Sabi dito, novels are long narrative. Sabi ko sa inyo, mahaba eh. Divided into chapters, and the events are taken from true-to-life stories. So, sir, events are taken from the true-to-life story daw. So, these are non-fictions. Well, not definitely all the time, non-fiction siya. Ang sabi lang dito, events are taken from a true-to-life story. May kinuha lang na event or particular na pangyayari na nakabase sa nangyari sa experience ng isang author o ng isang tao. Pero kapag may hinalo na dyan na supernatural powers, well, that's the time that it becomes fiction. Not all the time, non-fiction ang novel. Pwede rin siya maging fiction. And a short story naman is, well, a narrative involving one or more characters, as usual, katulad din ng novels, marami ding character, pwede ring isa. One plot and single impression. So what do we mean by that? Well, a plot, alam nyo naman yon. There's a beginning, there's a rising action, there's the climax of the story, falling action, and then the end of the story. Sa short story, may isang plot. Pagdating sa novel, maraming plot. Pwedeng pag ganon. And also, one impression. Pag sinabi nating single impression, meron bang isang patutunguhan lang yung storya? Kumbaga parang meron tayong expected ending at meron siyang tinuturo agad na expected na natin. Parang na-foreseen agad natin. Unlike novels, hindi natin alam ang mangyayari sa huli, no? Alright, so let's talk about plays. Pag sinabi nating plays, hindi yan lugar, hindi din yan laro. Pag sinabi nating plays, these are actually stories. However, the intention of telling the story is through a theatrical play, and on a stage play, pine-perform siya para lang may kwento yung gusto nilang ikwento. That is play. Legends. Pag sinabi nating legends, well, most of the time, hindi pala most of the time, talagang lagi. Sinabi nating legends, lagi siyang fictitious or based from our imaginations or from our ancestors' imagination. Good examples nga nito ay yung Bicol Legends, kung sa atin siguro yung alamat, yung mga alamat legends yun. Alamat ng Pinya, legends yan, And also, kung paano nag-pop up yung islands ng Philippines, yung dalawang higanting nagbabatuan, those are legends. Now, fables, well, madali naman. Fables, story that gives a learnings at the end. However, the characters are the animals, para silang tao, nagsasalita yung mga hayop. Sikat na sikat ito para sa mga bata. As in, para sa mga bata lang talaga to. Imagine the fact na nag-enjoy ka ba sa fables ngayon sa ganyang edad mo? Well, oo, siguro. Lalo na kung halimbawa yung mga characters sa anime. Halimbawa sa Naruto, yung aso ni Kakashi. Hindi naman exactly, yun, mako-considered mo agad fable. Pero it is a fictitious novel of Naruto. Parang ganun lang. Anecdotes. Pag sinabi naman nating anecdotes, well, merely products of the writer's imagination. So, parang almost fictitious na rin siya. And the main aim is to bring out lessons to the readers. Last time, pinagawa ko kayo ng short stories. Most of you actually created an anecdote, based from their own stories, their point of view. Tapos, at the end, may binigay siyang particular na lesson na halimbawa siguro ay ang pagkakatanda ko sa mga stories na ginawa nyo ay yun, sinabi niya na halimbawa may nakilala siyang kaibigan, tapos yung kaibigan niya ay nakahanap na ulit ng panibagong kaibigan, dinamdam niya daw yun. Tapos at the end sinabi niya, don't put so much trust on a particular person, at hindi lang iisa ang tao sa mundo. Parang ganun yung sinabi niya at the end of his story. So that particular example is an anecdote, Well, merely kasi most of the time based from the true to life story naman yung yung mga pinagsasabi nila o yung kung paano nila inilathala yung istorya. Pero sometimes to make it more interesting, medyo nagkakaroon ng imaginary write-ups or writings do sa kanyang anecdotes. Now, next example is an essay. When we talk about essay, yan, isa pa ito. Most of you didn't actually write a short story. Instead, they wrote an essay. Pag sinabi nating essay, viewpoint noong author, no? Parang siya, nagsasalita siya, sinasabi niya pati yung kanyang sariling opinion. Hindi siya nagsasabi ng storya. Hindi siya nagkukwento noong palimbawang pangyayari. Ang ginawa niya, nagbigay siya ng opinion sa isang pangyayari o sa isang storya. So marami yan sa inyo. Well, very good examples of essays are on the newspaper, sa opinion part, no, makikita nyo yan. Those are essays. At saka syempre, kapag nagtatanong ang teacher sa inyo, sa mga exams, no, what do you think of something? Can you tell me something about a particular person or particular thing? So kapag sinagot mo yon, yung sagot mo talaga doon, essay siya may consider kasi opinion mo ang hinihingi ng teacher. No? Next one is biography. No? Pag sinabi nating biography, well, easy, no? Life of a person, story of a person about his particular life. Sabi ko nga sa examples niya na yung life and works of Rizal, no? So this is also an example of a prose. A news is an example of prose because this is a story of a particular event. However, walang halong o walang dagdag na kung ano-ano, factual, pure story of that particular event, nilalathala niya. And of course, it is written in an artistic way because may mga elements silang sinusunod. From the most important to the least important. The first paragraph should answer the W's. No? Parang ganun. Anyways, a news is an example of a prose because definitely it is a story and written in a common flow of conversation. Oration. Pag sinabi nating oration naman, class, well, kadalasan to sa mga politicians. Ano? Yung nagkakaroon siya ng speech. Well, all the speeches of the politicians should be written in a common flow of conversation. Kasi kapag ginawa niya yan melodious tone or kaya malalalim ang salita ng ginamit niya, hindi siya maintindihan ng tao, hindi siya iboboto. Well, kaya most of the orations are actually written in a common flow of conversation. And actually, is giving inspirations, depende sa kanilang mga purpose. But an oration is an example of a prose. Poetry. So, poetry are written in stanzas or verse and written in melodious tone or poetic nga, ano, kumbaga ay mga matatalinhagang salita. And there are three kinds of poetry. Well, the first one is narrative poetry, the second one is lyric poetry, and the last one is dramatic poetry. But before we go on to those types of poetry, let us first tackle or discuss the elements of poetry. Alright, so this is an example of a poem. I simply grabbed this from the internet for our understanding or for the discussion of the elements of poetry. I do not know who is the author but sorry na, ginagamit ko to para sa aking lesson. Anyways, well, this poem will definitely help us to identify or to understand the elements of poetry. Now, my discussion won't be systematic or sunod-sunod batay do sa inyong module. So, class, simply go with the flow na lang sa aking discussion. Ano? Anyways, so sabi sa definition ng poetry or ng poem, a poem is written in stanzas or verses. Ano? So sabi, written daw in stanzas. So, saan dito ang mga stanzas sa poem na to? Ayan. So, this poem has 3 stanzas. Stanza 1, 2, and 3. Kumbaga sa story or simpleng essay, ito ay tinatawag sa kanila dito ay mga paragraph. Pero pagdating sa poetry or sa poem, ang tawag na dito ay stanzas. Ano? Now, let's talk about rhythm. Pag sinabi nating rhythm class, well, you do have your own definitions on your module, but for explanation lang, bear with me. Pag sinabi nating rhythm, paano mo binabasa yung poem? Now, for us to know kung paano ang tamang pagbabasa ng poem, it is important for us to identify the stress and unstress to each line. Stress and unstress sa bawat words, each line. And for us to identify the stress and unstress, it is also important for us to identify the syllables for each word and for each lines. Can you follow? Ganito lang yan eh. Rhythm daw ay paano mo babasahin yung poem. So, paano mo mababasa yung poem? Identify mo yung stress and unstress. Halimbawa, sa first line, find your passion. So, paano mo siya babasahin? Sa paano paraan? Let's identify the syllables. How many syllables are there on this particular line? Find your passion. There are 4 syllables. Hatiin natin siya. Find your passion. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 syllables in this particular line. Now, let's identify the stress and unstress. Pag sinabi nating stress, rising yung tone ng pagkakabasa. Pag unstress, flat lang siya or pababa. And yun yung stress and unstress. Now, let's try to identify. Find your passion. So, that's how are we going to say this particular line or utter this particular line. Find your passion. Parang ganun. Find your passion. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na halimbawa dito sa word na passion. Hindi mo siya pwedeng ito ang unstress at ito naman ang stress. Kasi magmumukha siyang passion. Hindi naman pwede yun. So, dapat ang stress dito ay yung pa. And yung unstress ay yung shon. So, passion. Hindi siya passion. Hindi siya ganun. Alright? Now, let's talk about meter. When we talk about meter class, well, susukatin natin ang per line dito sa poem na to. Pag sinabi natin susukatin, hindi yung kukuha ka ng medida tapos sukatin mo kung gaano kahaba yung line. Hindi. Ang pagsusukat ng poem class ay batay sa kung gaano karaming syllables ang meron sa isang particular line at sa isang stanza. Halimbawa, sa first line, ilan ang syllables? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 syllables. Sa second line, ilan? That seems to have gone out of fashion. Fashion. Ganon. So, ilan yon? That seems to have gone out of fashion. So, there are 9 syllables ang meron dito. So, that is meter. Bibilangin natin kung ilang syllables ang meron sa isang linya. Kuha. Now, let's talk about rhyme. When we talk about rhyme class, well, from the word itself, katunog. Good example of this is passion and fashion. Nagra-rhyme sila, hindi ba? Sean. See, free. Di ba? It. Passion here, fashion there, rhymes, no. Man, first, hand, so hindi sila magkaka-rhyme. So when we talk about rhyming, magkakatunog o the sounds, they sound the same, parang ganon. So that is rhyme. Now, let's talk about the rhyme scheme. So, pag sinabi nating rhyme scheme, we're actually going to identify kung sino ang magkakatunog sa poem na to. First, find your passion. So, let's categorize this as A. A siya. Kasi siya yung unang-unang sound. Fashion. Katunog ba siya nung passion? The end ng kanyang sound? Oo. So, let's label this as an A. C, fashion. Magkatunog? Hindi. Panibagong sounds na naman to. So, Let's label this as B. C, free, magkatunog. Ay, yung fashion, katunog niya? Hindi. So, hindi siya A. Katunog ba niya yung C? Yes. So, siya ay ililabel natin as B. Nod, job. Hindi. Ang nod, panibagong tunog na naman. So, let's label this as C. Job, katunog ba niya yung passion? Fashion, hindi. C, katunog ba niya? Hindi rin. Yung nod, katunog niya? Hindi rin. So, panibagong label na naman siya. A, B, C, D. Ayan. It, job, hindi. Panibagong tunog na naman to. So, let's label this as E. Katunog ba niya yon? Hindi. Panibagong ano siya eh. Tawag dito, sound. Ay, yung have it. Katunog ba nun? Nung it doon? Opo. So, let's label this as E. Kasi katunog niya yon. Passion. Uy, may katunog siya. Yung passion tsaka yung fashion. So, let's label this as A. Man, walang katunog. A, B, C, D, E, F. So, panibagong sound na naman siya. First, panibagong sound na naman siya. Wala siyang katunog dito. So, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Hands, wala. H. Bagong sound sa naman. So, ang kanyang rhyme scheme ay magiging A, B, B, C, D, E, A, F, G, H. Ayan. So, for better understanding, rhymes talks about if they sounds the same. End word ng each line, do they sound the same? So, those are rhymes. So, kapag sinabi naman nating rhyme scheme, ano yung pattern? No? May pattern siya kung magkakatunog ba yung mga end word ng particular line. So, ito siya. A, B, B, C, D, E, iyon ha. Sorry naman, E. Iyon. A, F, G, H. So, that is the rhyme scheme or rhyme pattern. Okay, gets? Alright. Now, let's talk about theme. So, pag sinabi nating theme, ito yung idea ng poem na gustong iparating ng poem. Well, if you're going to read this poem, well, definitely, it talks about doing things that make you happy. Diba? So, the theme here is, ano yung theme? Theme natin ay doing things that make us happy. Ayan. So, that is the theme. Diba? Let's talk about symbolism. Pag sinabi natin class symbolism, well, this deals with word or words na hindi talaga yun yung gusto niyang sabihin. Kumbaga, yung words na yun or word na yun ay nandun lang just to give us a particular definition. Ano, kumbaga ay, anong tawag dito? May other meaning siya, may gusto siyang ibang ipahiwatig. A good example of a symbol here sa poem na to ay itong 9.5 job na ito. Wala namang 9.5 na job talaga, hindi ba? Ano yung 9.5 job? Ang ibig sabihin ng 9.5 job kasi class ay hard labor o mahirap na trabaho. No? So, kaya nga sinabi dyan, why wait for a nod from your 9.5 job? Ang ibig sabihin yan, bakit ka pa maghihintay sa iyong mahirap na trabaho? Humanap ka na ng ikatutuwa mo o yung ikasisiya mo. Kunin mo kaagad, no? So, yun yung ibig sabihin ng particular na linya na yon. Huwag ka na maghintay pa ng ikatutuwa mo mula sa iyong mahirap na trabaho. No? So, yun yung symbolism. Now, the last element of poetry is what we call imagery, no? Pag sinabi natin imagery class, imagery. Well, from the word itself, imagination. So, 'di ba, kapag tayo nagbabasa ng isang particular na poem or story, may automatic na picture na pumupunta sa isip natin. So that is imagery. So while you're reading this poem, well, try to read this. When you're reading this poem, nagkakaroon tayo ng picture sa isip natin kung ano ang nangyayari, 'di ba? So that is imagery. As you can see, that's my brother Joven. Is not doing his modules. Very good. Ayan, napakagaling. Alright, so types of poetry. So that will be our next discussion. However, first thing first, yung pinaka-famous na tanong na lahat, ano daw yung nature of poetry or nature of a poem? Well, when we talk about nature of poetry, it also deals with the function of poetry. So parang iisa lang sila. Well, some may say that the nature of the poetry is actually its elements. However, iba pa yon. Pag sinabi natin nature, function siya din noong poetry. So there are three nature or function of poetry. Number one is to please. Number two is to move. And number three is to transport. Remember. So number one, to please. So pag sinabi natin to please, well, basically this is to entertain us, no? So ang function noong poem is simply as for entertaining. Good examples of these are flip tops. Well, the lines, well, yung ginagamit nila doon is actually a poem, no? Nagbabatuan sila ng linya, but the main reason is to entertain. So to please. Although kahit hindi siya nakakatuwa masyado yung mga bastos na linya, pero nakakatawa naman talaga yung mga rebutts nila. The number two function is to move. Well, when we talk about this deals with emotions, no? Kung a particular poem emotionally move you, no? Kumbaga, it makes you from sad to happy, no? O kaya naman, when you read that particular poem, it saddens you, no? Kumbaga, pinalungkot ka niya, no? The number three is to transport. Well, hindi para isakay ka at daling ka sa isang lugar. When we talk about to transport, it talks about inspiring you to do something, or to do better, or to do worse. So, kapag nakabasa ka ng poem, in-inspire ka ba niya na gawin ng isang bagay? Katulad ng poem natin kanina, huwag ka na magpatumpik-tumpik pa, no? Or does it transport you to do something bad, that particular poem, or by reading that particular poem? So those are the three nature or functions of poetry. Narrative poetry. So from the word itself, narrative, nagnanarrate, nagkukwento. Kaya siya naging poetry kasi written siya in stanzas or verse and using melodious tone. So, kaya siya naging narrative poetry. Ngayon, merong kinds of narrative poetry. Meron tayong epic poetry, meron tayong metrical tale, and ballads. So, anong pinagkakaiba ng mga yon? When we talk about epic poetry class or epic poetry, well, may particular character do sa kwento na merong supernatural power or supernatural control, no? Story siya ng parang superhero, yun, pero in a poetic way. So that's an epic poetry. When we talk about metrical tale naman class, well, para siyang short story ng prose, no? Meron siyang beginning, rising action, climax, falling, at saka ending. Pero poetic ang pagkakasulat sa kanya. So that's metrical tale. Meron din naman tayong ballads, no? Yung ballads naman class, para din siyang metrical tale, may storya din siya, pero may specific pattern, sound pattern siya, no? Yung kanina pinag-usapan natin yung rhyme scheme, 'di ba? Kita natin may pattern yung mga rhymes doon. So, sa ballad, para siyang metrical tale, short story, pero pagdating sa ballad, laging AB, 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 AB ang kanyang rhyme scheme. Alright, so lyric poetry. So pag sinabi nating lyric poetry, well, these are poems that are meant to be sung, ano, para kantahin. So yun yung ibig sabihin ng lyric poetry. Now, meron din itong mga uri like folk songs, sonnets, elegy, ode, psalm, awit, and corridos, no. First thing first, folk songs. So without a doubt, alam naman natin kung ano yung mga folk songs na yan. Yung mga chichirichit, alibang-bang. Yan. So, those are poems that are meant to be sung. And folk songs, awiting bayan, kumbaga. Sikat sa atin as awiting bayan. Next one is sonnet. Well, a typical poem has 4 stanzas or 3 stanzas or 5 or 10 stanza. Pag sonnet class, as in isang bagsakan siyang isang stanza na meron siyang 14 lines. Unlike the ordinary poems wherein divided siya sa 4 or 5 stanzas, tapos each stanza has 3 lines, 4 lines or 5 lines. Sa sonnets, isang biglaan siya. Isang stanza with 14 lines. So makikita mo kaagad kung siya ay isang sonnet. Well, meant to be sung siya, lalo sa mga theater play, no? Yung mga lines doon ng mga characters, they're actually singing sonnets. Next one is elegy. Pag sinabi natin class elegy, well, this is a lyric poem which expresses feelings of grief or melancholy and whose theme is death. So, alam mo yun, from the definition itself na no need for further explanation, kalungkutan, ano, pagdadalamhati, yan. Yun yung kanyang tema. Next one is ode. This poem is of a noble feeling expressed with dignity, with no definite number of syllables or no definite number of lines in a stanza. So, ang example nito, kung napanood nyo na yung The Hobbit, yung sila Frodo Baggins, si Bilbo Baggins pala, no? Yung kumakanta yung mga dwarf doon sa kanyang bahay. So yun, example yun ng ode, no? With dignity. They are singing about what happened to their land. So, kumbaga. Pero hindi sila sumusuko. Parang ganon. So that's ode. Next one is psalm. Yung salmo, yung dalit, no? Yung makikita mo yung sa mga kantahin pag piyesta o kaya ay kapag bago magpasko, yung tungkol kay Virgin Mary, philosophy of life, ganyan, etc. So that's psalm. Awit. So magkaiba yung awit do sa tinatawag nating salmo, ha, o yung dalit. Pag sinabi nating awit or song, these have measures of 12 syllables and slowly sung to the accompaniment of a guitar or bandurria. Katulad ngayon sa Florante and Laura, no, yung kantahin doon. Kung napanood nyo na yung theater play doon tungkol sa Florante at Laura. So that's awit. Corridos, these have measures of 8 syllables and recited to a martial beat. So pag sinabi nating martial beat, yung gano'n, yung gano'n, parang bayang magiliw parang gano'n. So that's martial beats. So, well, that's lyric poetry. Okay, talking about dramatic poetry, well, the intention of this is for dramatization, for play din. And it has also its kinds: comedy, melodrama, tragedy, farce, and social poems. So, una, comedy. Literal, pag sinabi sa ating comedy, nakakatawa agad. Pero hindi talaga yun ang ibig niya sabihin. Pag sinabi natin comedy, sabi sa modules nyo, from the Greek word komos, meaning festivity or revelry. Simple lang siyang storya, no? Simple lang siyang, story na dinramatize, no? Na may mga matatalinhagan salita. Well, that's comedy. Meron din siyang happy ending. Well, its main aim is for amusing or for entertaining. That's dramatic poetry, comedy. Now, the next one is melodrama. Pag sinabi nating melodrama, ganun din siya, para din siyang comedy, pero mix siya. Meron siyang tragedy, yung mga pagkabigo, meron din siyang comedy, na ibig ko sabihin ay yung parang farce, nakakatawa, ganun. Tragedy, from the word itself, it is a dramatic poetry na meron siyang sad ending. Ano? Sabi nga dyan it is the hero is struggling mightily against a dynamic force that meets death or ruins without success and satisfaction na bigo. Parang gano'n. So that's tragedy. The next one is farce. Ito talaga yung tinatawag natin na comedy talaga. No, yung nakakatawa. From the meaning itself, it is actually an exaggerated comedy. It seeks to arouse mirth by laughable lines. No? Parang gusto ko talagang patawanin. Pag sinabi naman natin class na social poems, sabi dyan, this form is either purely comic or tragic and it pictures the life of today and it may aims to bring about changes in social conditions. Usong-uso ito nung panahon ng Hapon at panahon ng Kastila dito sa Philippines, wherein yung may pagka-political yung kanilang approach sa kanilang mga dramatic poetry, no? So kasi nga ang aim ng particular poem na to or dramatic poetry na to is for change, social change and change for our condition. Yeah. So that is the types of poetry. And that is the end of module 1. Thank you.